Have you ever felt like you're living inside a portrait painted by someone else, and that portrait doesn't reflect who you truly are? What if just one sentence could make a manipulator lose all control over you? Would you want to know what that sentence is? This isn't fiction, it's the chilling truth about how narcissists operate and how you can break their game. Imagine standing face to face with someone who, for years, has quietly and skillfully manipulated you, twisting your thoughts, reshaping your self-image, and controlling how you see yourself. They didn't need force, just subtle words, calculated silence, and a well-practiced charm. Now, imagine the immense power you'd reclaim if, with a single sentence, you could pierce that illusion and seize back your identity fully and unapologetically. What if I told you that such a sentence truly exists and that it has the ability to shake a narcissist to their core? A sentence that doesn't just catch them off guard, but makes them fear the one thing they can't control, the truth being seen. You see, narcissists don't build their identity on solid ground like values, integrity, or character. Instead, their sense of self is constructed like a house of mirrors, all reflections, no substance. Their image is everything. It must be admired, validated, envied, not as a desire, but as a need, a survival mechanism. Without admiration, they feel as though they're vanishing into nothingness. Beneath their confident exterior lies a fragile, unstable core fractured by unresolved shame and buried insecurities they refuse to face. Instead of healing these inner wounds, they wrap themselves in a carefully crafted persona, bold, flawless, untouchable. They don't live in the truth of who they are, but in the illusion of who they want others to believe they are. Narcissists become master manipulators of perception. They observe others with laser focus, not out of empathy, but as a strategy. Every word, every glance, every emotional cue is studied to determine how best to influence, deceive, or impress. Their ability to read the room is not an act of connection, but of control. They transform themselves into whatever others want to see, not because it's who they are, but because it's who they need to appear to be. Their charm? It's not sincerity, it's camouflage. They will morph emotionally, mentally, even morally, just to uphold their illusion of superiority. But this performance comes at a steep cost. Their entire sense of self-worth is dependent on others. The illusion only holds as long as people believe in it. Once someone stops playing along, once someone sees through the act, the narcissist starts to unravel. This isn't just a hit to their ego, it's a crisis, an existential threat. Why? Because when admiration fades, when control slips away, they're left alone with a terrifying mirror, one that reflects the parts of themselves they've spent their entire life avoiding. That's why narcissists often surround themselves with people who are easy to manipulate, those who are deeply empathetic, unsure of themselves, or averse to conflict. These individuals are less likely to challenge them and more likely to internalize blame for problems that were never theirs to carry. It creates a perfect ecosystem where the narcissist remains adored and unquestioned. But what happens when someone starts seeing clearly, when the illusion begins to crack? Let's explore that unraveling in page 2. As we explored earlier, the narcissist's illusion only thrives as long as no one dares to look behind the mask. But the moment someone starts to see the cracks, when truth begins to emerge, everything starts to shift. That's when fear sets in. They may not always show it on the surface, but underneath, the narcissist reacts with rage, silent withdrawal, or subtle forms of passive aggression. Why? Because it's not just about disliking criticism, it's the fear of being exposed. Exposed for who they really are beneath the carefully constructed image. To keep their control intact, narcissists turn to psychological tactics designed to distort reality. One of the most powerful weapons in their arsenal? Gaslighting. This manipulative strategy twists your perception of reality, making you doubt your memory, your judgment, even your own sanity. Every moment you question yourself is a moment they strengthen their grip. And here's the critical part. They don't need to be right, they just need you to feel wrong. Because their power doesn't come from genuine strength, it comes from your self-doubt. If they can keep you second-guessing yourself, they remain in control. That's why understanding the role of emotional truth is so important. Not just the facts, but the internal clarity of knowing what you feel, what you've seen, and what is real. The narcissist's greatest fear is not exposure through physical proof or confrontation. It's when someone speaks calmly, clearly, and with unwavering emotional honesty. At that moment, the illusion begins to crumble. Their influence weakens because their power lies in your confusion, not in your understanding. They deeply fear individuals who see through them, people who can't be manipulated with guilt, flattery, or subtle threats. Why? Because those people become reflective mirrors, not of fantasy, but of truth. And for someone who has spent their life crafting a persona to hide their wounds, truth is not just uncomfortable, it's unbearable. To a narcissist, being known is the ultimate vulnerability. If someone truly sees them not the image, not the performance, but the truth, then they no longer have control over how they're perceived. And that is terrifying. Because when perception slips away, so does the only version of reality they've ever trusted, the one they created. That's why narcissists rely so heavily on distortion, projection, and manipulation. These are not just habits, they are essential tools in constructing a world where they are always the hero, the victim, or the misunderstood genius. In this world, blame belongs to others, and they are never at fault. But why go to such extremes? Because deep within, often buried beneath conscious awareness, lies a core of intense shame. This shame is too painful to confront. So instead, they inflate their self-image like a balloon, not out of true confidence, but to shield themselves from the terrifying possibility that they might be ordinary, flawed, or unworthy. So when truth shows up, especially a truth that directly contradicts the grandiose self they've spent years defending, it doesn't just bruise the ego. It threatens to collapse the entire psychological defense system they've built for survival. This is the defining difference. A narcissist isn't just prideful or self-centered. Their entire identity is structured as a defense, a fortress built not on growth, but on avoidance of pain. Where most of us learn and grow through honest reflection, hard truths, and the humility of self-awareness, narcissists avoid these experiences like wildfire. For them, truth isn't a path to healing, it's the enemy. But what happens when that truth is finally spoken and refused to be silenced? Let's uncover that pivotal moment together in page 3. Previously, we explored how truth, especially when spoken calmly and without emotional turmoil, can crack the narcissist's illusion. But what happens when someone refuses to be baited into chaos and instead holds firm to integrity? To admit fault, to take ownership of one's mistakes, it sounds so simple, even human. But for the narcissist, this is no ordinary act. It is, in their mind, an existential threat. Why? Because humility and accountability are emotions they've been conditioned to associate not with strength, but with danger and shame. In their inner world, to be wrong is to collapse. To be vulnerable is to invite destruction. That's why narcissists devote their lives to avoiding truth not just from those around them, but from themselves. They construct an illusion so intricate, so persistent, that they begin to live inside it. In this illusion, they are always right, always misunderstood, always the victim of someone else's failings. This is also why the calm, measured voice of truth is so disruptive to them. Narcissists are prepared for drama. In fact, they thrive on it. They provoke chaos to confuse, deflect, and control. But when someone refuses to get pulled into emotional turbulence, when they stay rooted in clarity, without shouting, without apologizing, they introduce something that cannot be manipulated: integrity. And integrity? It's like a wall they can't climb. It doesn't shift. It doesn't seek approval. It doesn't respond to gaslighting. It just stands firm. That unwavering stillness, that silent clarity, terrifies the narcissist because it strips them of the tools they've relied on for so long. In the hands of someone who sees clearly, truth becomes a scalpel. It cuts through the fog of manipulation, revealing all the cracks, the contradictions, the double standards, the carefully spun lies. And when this truth is spoken in front of others, the narcissist loses control not just of the conversation, but of the narrative. They can no longer decide who they are in the eyes of the group. The hero mask slips, the victim story unravels, the genius facade falters, because now there's another lens in the room. One that isn't tinted by fear or admiration. It's grounded in reality, and reality is not on the narcissist's side. What makes it worse for them is that their entire identity hinges on how others perceive them. External validation isn't just desirables, they're emotional oxygen. When someone dares to speak the truth, it threatens to change how others view them. Suddenly, doubts begin to form. Other people in the group may start noticing patterns they previously dismissed. Because clarity is contagious, it spreads, and the narcissist knows this instinctively. That's why even a small, quiet truth spoken without anger, without attack, can provoke an outsized reaction. You might see them erupt in rage, go completely silent, or retaliate in subtle, vindictive ways. It's not because the statement itself is that damning. It's because it's real, and reality poses the one thing they cannot defeat: truth that refuses to bend. Without confusion to weaponize, without stories to spin, and guilt to shift, they are left fully exposed. But what happens when that exposure continues, when more people begin to see clearly? Let's find out together in the next part, page 4. As we've seen, when truth is calmly and clearly spoken, it strips away the narcissist's illusions and control. But there's something else, just as powerful something, that silently declares, "You no longer get to define my reality." That power is boundaries. For someone who has built their entire psychological survival on never being truly seen, the experience of being seen clearly with no illusions, no masks, is utterly terrifying. That's why boundary setting isn't just about self-care. It's not just about saying no. It's a bold act of psychological independence. It's a declaration that says, "I belong to myself." And to a narcissist, that is nothing short of rebellion. Narcissists thrive in environments where boundaries are blurred or completely absent. They look for relationships where they can call the shots emotionally, where their needs come first, their opinions dominate, and their behavior, no matter how intrusive or manipulative, is tolerated without resistance. In such settings, they can feed off others like emotional parasites. But when someone begins to draw clear, consistent boundaries and holds them, the narcissist doesn't see it as a healthy agreement of mutual respect. They see it as a threat, as a loss of control. Because in their worldview, boundaries imply equality, and equality disrupts their sense of dominance. To the narcissist, others aren't independent people with their own thoughts and emotions. They're extensions of the narcissist's ego. So when you say something as simple as, "I need space," or "I won't discuss this with you," you're not just setting a limit. You're challenging their belief that they have full, unrestricted access to your time, your energy, and your emotions. And they do not take that challenge lightly. This perceived loss of entitlement can trigger a range of responses, from subtle guilt-tripping and passive aggression to outright anger and attacks. All of it aimed at breaking down your boundaries so they can reestablish control. But here's why setting boundaries is such a powerful move. It requires you to be rooted in your own self-awareness and self-worth. It communicates that you are no longer someone who can be guilted, gaslighted, or emotionally blackmailed. It says, I decide how people engage with me. To a narcissist who manipulates through fear, guilt, and charm, this is like emotional armor they can't pierce. And when their usual tactics, love bombing, victim playing, or launching smear campaigns don't work, it exposes something they desperately try to hide, their desperation. These aren't signs of strength, they're signs of collapse. Because every time your boundary holds, the narcissist loses another grip on their source of emotional supply. Remember, a narcissistic relationship isn't based on mutual exchange. It's parasitic. They depend on your emotional compliance, on you giving in, apologizing, or fixing things even when you did nothing wrong. But a boundary? A real, unwavering, clearly communicated boundary? It throws a wrench into that entire cycle. It introduces something they can't easily twist or manipulate: consistency. And that changes everything. Because narcissists don't just fear truth, they fear predictable resistance. So what happens when you stay calm, stay consistent, and don't flinch? Let's uncover that shift in page 5. We just uncovered how calm, consistent boundaries can dismantle the narcissist's power. But what happens when you no longer react, when you emotionally disconnect and no longer play their game? That's when everything changes, because when you remove emotional reactivity from the equation, you take away their most powerful weapon, leverage. The dynamic instantly shifts. No longer are they the emotional puppeteer. Now, there's a clear psychological separation, and that terrifies them. You see, narcissists measure their worth by how much control they have over others. So when that control slips through their fingers, it's deeply unsettling. But here's the critical truth. Boundary setting is not about changing the narcissist. It's about changing your response to their behavior. It's not reactive. It's proactive. It doesn't require shouting, accusing, or issuing ultimatums. In fact, the less emotion you express, the more powerful your boundary becomes. Narcissists anticipate emotional pushback, yelling, crying, confrontation, because those responses are easy to twist and exploit. But when your response is calm, clear, and final, when it's not a debate but a decision, you send a signal that cuts deeper than words. You're no longer in their web. You've stepped out of the emotional drama, out of the manipulation loop they rely on, and that silent shift sends chills through their carefully crafted illusion. Why? Because if they can't provoke you, they can't control you. And if they can't control you, they can't feed the false sense of superiority that keeps their ego alive. Understand this. Narcissists don't just like control. They feed on emotional chaos. Their influence doesn't thrive in logic or clarity. It thrives in confusion, volatility, and reaction. That's where their real power lies. It's not about being right. It's about getting a rise out of you. So when you remain composed, when your energy is calm, centered, and unaffected, it's not perceived as neutrality. It's seen as defiance. It's as if your silence is saying, without ever raising your voice, I see you, and I'm no longer afraid. And that message, that's the most destabilizing message you can send to a narcissist. They rely on their ability to trigger guilt, to spark anxiety, to ignite shame and doubt in their target. Because if they can get you to cry, scream, or over-explain, they can divert attention from their own faults and refocus it all on your emotional reaction. If you lose your calm, they regain control of the emotional stage. It's a subtle sleight of hand. Suddenly, you are under scrutiny, not them. This tactic isn't always deliberate, but it's deeply woven into their behavioral patterns. That's why your calm refusal to play along throws everything into disarray. It takes away the tools they know best. It removes the emotional triggers they depend on. But here's what's key. Calmness isn't weakness. It's not passivity. It's presence. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth, who no longer needs chaos to feel seen, and who refuses to be dragged into a cycle of emotional warfare. It's the energy of someone who can say no without shouting, who can hold a boundary without feeling the need to justify it endlessly, who sees the manipulation and simply chooses not to respond. And for the narcissist, this quiet power is not just unfamiliar, it's unbearable. Because in that stillness, they see everything they're not. They see stability, self-possession, and true inner control qualities they desperately mimic, but never truly possess. So what happens when the narcissist fails to provoke you and begins to lose the game they thought they were winning? Let's step into the final chapter in page 6. Earlier, we uncovered the quiet power of calm defiance, the ability to say no without rage, and to set boundaries without explanation. But what happens when you remain still, and the narcissist realizes they can no longer provoke a response? That's when the unraveling begins, because the power a narcissist holds, it's parasitic. It only survives if you react. The moment you stop flinching, stop justifying, stop begging, explaining, or lashing out their tactics, lose their bite. Their manipulation becomes hollow. Yes, they may escalate temporarily. You might see them raise their voice, grow harsher in tone, or throw one last emotional jab. But underneath that sudden aggression, it's not dominance. It's fear. You've become something deeply unsettling to them, unpredictable, not in a chaotic way, but in a grounded, stable way. You no longer respond the way they expect. You're not reactive anymore. That's terrifying to someone who depends on your emotional responses to feel powerful. And here's what's even more threatening. Your calm reveals their fragility. Narcissists rely on having their superiority mirrored back to them. They need others to reflect an image of importance, power, or brilliance because deep down, they don't believe it themselves. So when you respond with quiet clarity or even measured indifference, you're not feeding that illusion. You're holding up a mirror and they're forced to confront what's behind it. And what they see isn't strength, it's emptiness. Because in their world, strength looks like control, dominance, command. But you show a different kind of strength, the strength of restraint, self-command, and internal clarity. It's not loud, but it's immovable. And that's what makes it so intimidating. The narcissist expects to win by pushing others off balance, by shaking your confidence just enough so you fall back into their narrative. They assume you'll apologize for having boundaries or retreat from truth just to avoid confrontation. But when you don't flinch, when you hold steady, you reveal something undeniable. The game no longer works. And when there's no reward, no emotional reaction to extract, they begin to lose interest. Your peace becomes your loudest message, a message that quietly says, I will no longer be moved by fear, guilt, or confusion. And once they see that they can't reach into your inner world anymore, they lose the one thing they crave most, control. Now here's something important to understand. A narcissist's most powerful weapon isn't always anger or manipulation. It's guilt. Guilt is the quiet lever they pull to bend others to their will, all while appearing reasonable or even caring. They won't always demand. Instead, they frame their needs as your responsibility. Their failures, somehow your fault. Their unhappiness, you must have done something wrong. And if you believe it even a little, they've got you. That invisible thread of guilt is how they maintain control without ever needing to raise their voice. But the moment you stop believing you owe them anything, when you truly see that their disappointment is not your burden to carry the entire structure of control, begins to crumble. Taking back responsibility for your own life, for your choices, your energy, Your peace is one of the most radical and powerful things you can do in the face of narcissistic manipulation. It's not selfishness, it's not detachment, it's clarity. It's the recognition of where your emotional obligations begin and end. It means separating what is truly yours, your values, your mistakes, your path from what someone else has projected onto you to avoid their own accountability. Because here's the truth. Narcissists reject responsibility like it's poison. They will deflect, rewrite, and reframe anything to escape the discomfort of owning their actions. They'll become the misunderstood victim or the righteous martyr. But what happens when that no longer works? When you stop carrying what was never yours? Let's bring it all together in our final chapter, page 7. In the previous section, we saw how reclaiming your peace and clarity strips away the narcissist's control. But what happens when you finally stop explaining and start owning your truth? That's when their tactics begin to fall apart. When you quietly, firmly claim your side of the psychological ledger, no more, no less, something powerful shifts. Their manipulation can no longer take root. Because guilt only works when there's doubt, when you're uncertain about your own intentions, your worth, or your values. And narcissists are keen observers of that uncertainty. They don't need to shout or demand. All they need is a crack in your self-trust. If they can make you question yourself even slightly, they can nudge your decisions, your words, and your actions, all without ever appearing to control you. That's how subtle their influence can be. You'll hear phrases like, "After everything I've done for you, you're being so selfish. You never cared about me anyway." Not because those words are true, but because they're designed to shake your foundation, to spark doubt, to make you ask, "Am I the problem?" And once you begin to waver, they see an opening and they move in to reclaim control. But when you've done the deep work, the inner work of honest self-reflection, those tactics lose their sting. You've already faced your flaws, made peace with your imperfections, and drawn clear lines between what is yours to carry and what isn't. Because responsibility doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean always getting it right. It means being able to say, yes, that part was mine, and that part was not. It's not a shield of defense, it's a moral foundation. And here's the magic. When you know the truth about yourself, you don't need to defend it. You don't have to over-explain. You don't have to over-apologize. You don't have to shrink to fit someone else's fragile ego. That quiet, grounded clarity becomes your emotional armor, and to the narcissist, it's impenetrable. The hooks they once used to manipulate your guilt, fear, and confusion, they no longer stick. You've stepped out of their emotional reality and back into your own. And the most powerful part of this transformation, it's quiet. You don't need to call them out. You don't need to expose or argue or beg them to understand. That's the trap they set, the illusion that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, they'll get it and everything will change. But they don't want understanding. They want control. And the moment you stop trying to be understood and start acting from a place of calm responsibility, everything shifts. You stop chasing approval. You stop reacting to their distortions. You start choosing your next move based on your own values, not their expectations. To a narcissist, this is a psychological abandonment. You've exited the emotional role they assigned you, whether that role was the scapegoat, the fixer, the emotional punching bag, or the ever-loyal admirer. You are no longer a character in their script. You're a person whole, distinct, and sovereign. And that is when they panic. Not because they've suddenly realized they love you, but because they've lost access to you. The emotional supply is gone. You've become untouchable in the most powerful way. You belong to yourself. And in the narcissist world, there is no greater threat than someone who is truly, deeply free. Sometimes it all comes down to a single sentence. Not a dramatic speech, not a clever jab, but one calm, resolute line spoken with the full force of self-knowing. And to a narcissist, that can feel like thunder cracking through their illusion. And what might that sentence be? Let's bring it home in our final section, the conclusion. In the last section, we uncovered the quiet revolution that happens when you no longer seek the narcissist's approval. But what does it actually sound like, that pivotal moment when you reclaim yourself? Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "I don't accept that version of me. You don't get to speak to me that way anymore." Or even just number. Short, steady, and clear. But beneath those few words lies something much deeper, a quiet, internal revolution. That sentence marks the birth of sovereignty. It's the exact moment when you shift from being psychologically entangled in someone else's web to becoming emotionally autonomous. For the narcissist, control over your self-perception is everything. Their power isn't about brute force. It's not always loud or obvious. It's psychological and often invisible. They don't just want to influence what you do. They want to shape what you believe about yourself. If they can convince you that you're too much, not enough, too needy, too cold, too emotional, too selfish, then they don't have to control your actions directly. You'll begin to do it for them. You'll second-guess your instincts. You'll apologize even when you're not at fault. You'll avoid conflict even if it means sacrificing your needs. And slowly, quietly, you'll reshape yourself just to keep their approval intact. That's what makes narcissistic control so dangerous. It's not obvious. It doesn't need chains or threats. It rewires your internal compass so it points wherever they want it to. But then, one sentence, spoken with calm clarity, not from fear or rage, but from a deep knowing. And in that moment, you take back the pen. You reclaim authorship of your own identity. You are no longer asking the narcissist who you are. And that terrifies them. Why? Because it ends the game. Their entire system of influence crumbles when you stop reacting, stop performing, and stop trying to fit into the frame they built for you. That sentence, no matter how softly spoken, breaks the spell. It sends a clear, undeniable message. My self-worth is not up for negotiation. This is why narcissists fear truth, why they fear boundaries. But most of all, they fear the moment you wake up, the moment you realize the cage you've been living in was never locked. They fear that piercing clarity, that instant when you stop blaming yourself and start seeing the pattern for what it truly was, not your failure, but their system. A system designed to keep you small, dependent, and lost in self-doubt. When you speak that sentence, you're not threatening, not attacking. You're simply turning on the light. You're no longer sitting in the dark wondering, is it me? You've seen the illusion. And once seen, it can't be unseen. That sentence doesn't need volume. It doesn't need drama. What it holds is weight, the weight of truth. It is your first real act of psychological freedom. It's the boundary that won't bend, the truth that won't shift. The mirror that no longer reflects the narcissist's projection. And for someone who has built their identity on controlling how others see them, that mirror becomes unbearable. Because now, you're no longer reflecting who they are. You're refusing to play your part in their story. You've become unpredictable. And more dangerously unshapeable. They may try to retaliate. They may dismiss you, guilt trip you, or try to reel you back in. But what happens when that no longer works? Let's bring this journey to its powerful end in the final section, page 9. Previously, we explored how a single sentence, calm, clear, and rooted in truth, can shake the very foundation of a narcissist's control. But what happens after the sentence is spoken? They may test you, they might act as if nothing happened, or push your buttons just to see if you'll fold. That's their way of asking, did you really mean it? But here's the beauty of it. The power of the sentence isn't in how often you repeat it, it's in how you live it. Once spoken, it doesn't just exist in words. It exists in your posture, your tone, your boundaries, your quiet decisions that no longer need validation. Because it's no longer just about what you said, it's about what you decided. You've reclaimed your voice. You've redrawn the map of your identity, not just to separate yourself from the narcissist, but to separate your past self from the person you are becoming. And for someone who thrived on your silence, your second guessing, and your need for their approval, that is the one thing they cannot undo. When you truly understand the psychology of a narcissist, you see it clearly. Their power was never in who they were. It was always in what you believed about yourself when you were around them. The illusion was built not on truth, but on perception. Your perception. So the moment you reclaim that perception when you say the sentence, draw the line, speak the truth, and stand your ground without rage or apology, you become untouchable, unshakable, unavailable in ways they never anticipated. You are no longer a character in their script. You're the author of your own. And that sentence, small as it may seem, is like a single thread that, once pulled, unravels the entire illusion they've spent years building. But this isn't about revenge. It's not about hurting them. It's about liberating yourself. Because when their approval no longer defines you, when their guilt can no longer bend you, when their chaos no longer interrupts your peace, they lose the only thing they ever truly held over you, access. That more than anything is what they fear. Not your anger, not your distance, but your transformation, because it's not about what you've done to them. It's about who you finally become. And that version of you rooted whole and unapologetically free is the one thing they can never manipulate.